I've always thought of myself as a regular guy. I work a decent 9 to 5, try to be a good husband and father, and do my best to keep things running smoothly at home. I never imagined that one day I'd be living out the kind of drama you usually only see in cheap soap operas. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. In my case, the day I found out my wife, Mary, was cheating on me with my lifelong friend Michael, was the day my entire world took a nosedive into chaos. I've heard people say that if you stick around long enough, every cliché eventually comes true. Turns out, discovering your wife is sneaking around with your best buddy is one of those well-worn tropes for a reason. It can happen to anyone, and it's absolutely gut-wrenching when it does. I always thought Mary and I were rock solid, and honestly, I believed Michael and I had the kind of friendship that couldn't be broken by anything short of a natural disaster. We'd practically grown up side by side, from kids trading baseball cards to adults working in the same industry. He was closer to me than my own cousins. But apparently, even tight bonds can shatter under the right conditions. Mary and I first crossed paths in our early 20s. I remember the day clearly. It was a hot July afternoon, and I was at this local carnival, mostly tagging along with some buddies from work. She was handing out flyers for a volunteer program at a nearby animal shelter. I was so drawn to her that I walked over, stuttered out a hello, and ended up signing up for the shelter program, just so I'd have an excuse to talk to her again. Within weeks, we were meeting up for coffee, chatting about our favorite authors, and taking late-night walks through the neighborhood. Our connection felt instant and powerful, almost like a summer thunderstorm that sweeps in out of nowhere. We got married a couple of years later, and it didn't take long for us to expand our family. By the time Mary and I turned 30, we already had 2 terrific kids, our son, Ethan, and our daughter, Ava. They've always been the light of our lives. Ethan, with his fearless drive to explore every corner of our backyard, and Ava with her sweet smile and boundless imagination. Mary and I worked hard to build a good home for them. We weren't perfect, but we made sure there was love in every room of our house. It's hard to sum up what Michael meant to me. We were so close that a lot of folks just assumed we were blood relatives. We met in the 5th grade, back when he moved to my town from 3 states away. His parents had just gotten divorced, and he wasn't exactly excited about the idea of making new friends. But I was a scrawny kid with a big mouth, and I forced him to open up whether he liked it or not. Over time, we became inseparable, playing baseball in the summer, riding bikes down the biggest hills we could find, and sneaking into each other's rooms on weeknights to trade magazines or watch wrestling on TV. Even after high school, when a lot of old friendships fall apart, we stayed tight. We chose different colleges, but never went more than a day or 2 without shooting each other a message or jumping on a call. After college, he landed a job in the same city I was living in, so it felt like a dream come true. Here we were, 2 grown men navigating adult life, still side by side. Michael eventually married a wonderful woman named Jennifer, and I stood by him as his best man. Everything seemed so perfect, like we'd all stumbled into some rare version of the American dream. One evening, a couple of months back, I was sitting alone in my den, sifting through some paperwork. Mary had told me she was going out to see a friend in the hospital, this old neighbor from her childhood who'd allegedly taken a bad fall. I wanted to believe her, so I didn't think twice about it. Then my phone buzzed on the table. It was a missed call from Mary's cell, which was odd since she was supposed to be at a bedside, not calling me. When I played the voicemail, all I heard was muffled voices, but one of them was definitely Michael's. He was saying something about meeting up at the usual spot, and Mary was giggling like a teenager in the background. A wave of dread swept through me. It was the kind of feeling you get when you look over a cliff and realize you might lose your balance. I tried to brush it off at first, telling myself there had to be some logical explanation. Maybe she and Michael had bumped into each other somewhere innocent. But deep down, something in my gut told me there was more to it. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined them together, holding hands, sharing secrets, and doing things that would rip my heart out. I spent the next couple of days in a daze, acting like a zombie around the house. Mary noticed I was off, but she assumed it was just job stress, or maybe a cold coming on. Meanwhile, I did my best to hide the storm of emotions that raged inside me. I'd break into cold sweats at odd times, and my stomach would tighten whenever I heard her phone ring. I told myself I needed to be sure before I confronted her, or, heaven forbid, told Michael off. I couldn't risk ruining multiple relationships on a hunch, even if that hunch was fueled by a scary voicemail I couldn't unhear. But sure enough, my worst fears were confirmed a few days later. I caught Mary in an outright lie about her whereabouts. She'd said she was meeting a friend for lunch, but I found a receipt in her purse from a hotel bar across town. Dated at the same time, she claimed to be in another city entirely. The receipt was signed by her, in that neat little scrawl I knew so well. And scrawled in the tip area, there was a note. "Thanks for a great afternoon, M." Instantly I knew M wasn't me. My heart pounded like a drum in my ears, and I wanted to throw up. I sat down in the garage, staring at that receipt until my eyes watered. That was the moment I knew the rumors in my head were true. My wife was cheating with Michael. It felt like the ground had cracked under my feet, swallowing every assumption I'd ever had about loyalty and love. For a short while, I clung to denial. I told myself it could be a misunderstanding, or maybe Mary had met up with Michael to plan some surprise party for me. I pulled out every excuse under the sun, desperate not to face the betrayal. Yet I knew better. Cheating was the only explanation that made sense, no matter how much I wished otherwise. What made it extra baffling was that Michael had his own marriage to Jennifer, a woman so radiant and kind that people turned their heads whenever she walked by. She was tall, with bright red hair that cascaded down her back, and piercing green eyes that seemed to glow with energy. To top it off, she was incredibly sweet, always bringing homemade cookies to barbecues and offering help to neighbors in need. The last time I saw them together, Michael was bragging about how lucky he was. Now, he was sneaking around with my wife behind Jennifer's back. I tried to imagine what would possess Michael to risk losing Jennifer for Mary. Sure, Mary was beautiful, she always has been, but so was Jennifer. So maybe attraction wasn't the root cause. Maybe, I reasoned, it was the thrill of it being forbidden, or a moment of weakness that spiraled out of control. Who knew? During those first few days, I couldn't muster the courage to talk to Mary face to face. On the outside, I went through the motions of normal life, heading to work, cooking meals, doing yard work. But on the inside, I was a hurricane of anger, despair, and confusion. I wondered if Mary and I had any chance to fix things. After all, we had years of marriage behind us, and 2 children who depended on us. Part of me clung to hope that we might sit down, talk it through, and repair the damage, if such a thing was even possible. I made up my mind that I'd confront Mary on a Friday night, right after dinner, when the kids were with my parents. But fate had other plans. Mary got a sudden phone call about some close family friend who'd taken a turn for the worse, and before I could say a word, she was racing out the door with an overnight bag. That pushed my planned confrontation to Monday. I ended up with a whole weekend to agonize over the situation. Luckily for me, my parents had offered to keep Ethan and Ava at their lake house for a few days. My mum and dad have always adored their grandchildren, and I couldn't argue with giving myself some mental space. So there I was, alone, frustrated, and bracing myself for a tough conversation that kept getting postponed. As I drove home from work that Friday, the weight of everything pressed down on me so hard, it felt like I was lugging around a backpack full of bricks. On a whim, I stopped by a corner store and grabbed a case of beer. 24 bottles. I told myself I'd finish them by Sunday night, even though I knew that was a dumb idea. It was a temporary plan, sure, but in that moment, it felt like the only escape I had. If I couldn't talk to Mary, at least I could drown my thoughts in a sea of alcohol. Walking into our empty home was almost eerie. The silence rang in my ears like a fire alarm, reminding me that I was utterly alone, with nothing but a million swirling questions to keep me company. I changed into comfy clothes, some worn-out shorts and an old t-shirt from my high school days, and decided to fix myself a quick dinner. Maybe something simple would help my mind slow down. I set a pot of water on the stove to boil some hot dogs, rummaged through the pantry for baked beans, and cracked open my first beer of the night. Usually cooking helps me relax, but all I could think about was Mary and Michael. Every time I sliced an onion or reached for a spice jar, my mind played a scene of them together, sneaking off to some motel or exchanging hushed phone calls. Right when I was about to sit down at the kitchen table, the doorbell rang. My stomach did a flip. Was Mary back earlier than expected? But when I opened the door, it was Jennifer standing on my porch in a loose tank top and slippers. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure I'd even let her in. "Hi," she said quietly, crossing her arms. "I'm sorry to just show up like this. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." I swallowed a lump in my throat. "Not really. I'm just making dinner," I told her, standing aside to let her in. "Come on in if you'd like." She gave me a small, grateful smile and stepped past me into the house. I shut the door, my mind racing. It was unusual to see Jennifer without Michael, especially at my place, especially at night. She followed me to the kitchen, where the hot dogs were just about done and the baked beans were starting to simmer. I could see tension in the way she held herself, like she was on the verge of bursting with some big revelation. I set a bottle of wine on the counter, one of the few fancy ones Mary kept around for special occasions, and asked Jennifer if she'd like a glass. She nodded, and I poured her some Merlot in one of our nicer wine glasses. We sat down, each of us making a plate of food. It felt oddly domestic and strangely intimate, considering we were both reeling from betrayal. The air was thick with unspoken questions. "So," I said after a few bites, "what brings you here tonight?" Jennifer took a sip of her wine and looked me straight in the eye. "I know Michael's not where he claims to be," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "He told me he was visiting a sick friend, but I know that's a lie. He's with Mary right now, room 130 at Riverview Lodge. I did some digging, and that's what I found out." I was so stunned that I nearly dropped my fork. Even though I suspected something like that, hearing it confirmed was like getting kicked in the chest. "They're there tonight?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded. "Yes. I overheard a phone call, then checked his bank statements. There's a reservation charge for Riverview Lodge under his name. He tried to cover it up by booking under a friend's account, but he's not as clever as he thinks." I sank back into my chair, trying to steady my breathing. I knew they were cheating, I admitted, but I didn't realize it was happening right now. Jennifer looked sad and angry all at once, like she was grappling with the same whirlwind of emotions I'd been stuck in for days. "When did you find out?" she asked. "Not too long ago," I told her, swirling my own beer in the bottle. "I overheard a phone call myself, and then I found proof, a hotel receipt Mary left in her purse." We fell silent for a moment. It was as if the two of us were standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the wreckage of our marriages. Then Jennifer inhaled sharply, as though she'd decided something important. "I can't let Michael walk all over me," she declared. "I've been faithful to him for years, and he repays me by sneaking around with your wife? It's not right. I want to do something about it, something that makes him pay." I frowned, not fully understanding. "Pay how?" In response, she walked around the table and settled herself on my lap. My heart thundered in my chest, and I felt my cheeks burn. I'd never been in such a situation before. My best friend's wife, inches from my face, smelling like lavender shampoo and heartbreak. She brushed a strand of hair from her eyes and stared at me intensely. "Look," she said softly. "They tossed their vows aside the minute they decided to cheat on us. That means we're off the hook too, right?" For a moment I was speechless. There was a battle inside me, my moral code telling me not to stoop to their level, and my anger telling me that turnabout was fair play. It didn't help that Jennifer was an attractive woman who was clearly offering more than just a shoulder to cry on. Then, out of nowhere, Jennifer hit me with a piece of information that changed everything. "I've been trying to get pregnant," she said, her eyes hardening. "I'm in my fertile window right now. Michael doesn't deserve to be a father. But if I get pregnant, I want him to raise a child that's not his." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. It was a shocking blend of heartbreak and vengeance, and I found myself caught in the crosshairs. I couldn't deny the temptation. To hurt Michael the way he'd hurt me, to do it in a way that would leave a permanent mark on his life. The anger I felt toward Mary and Michael was overwhelming, and in that raw moment, my usual sense of right and wrong took a back seat. I murmured something like, "If we do this, let's do it on Mary's side of the bed." It was a spiteful impulse, the kind that flares up when your heart is broken and you're desperate to regain some control. Jennifer's eyes gleamed with a twisted mix of satisfaction and heartbreak. "Then show me the way," she said. We headed upstairs, neither of us uttering a single word the whole time. My heartbeat roared in my ears. The second we reached the bedroom, everything else blurred. It was this collision of grief, betrayal, and raw physical desire, like we were trying to reclaim our dignity in the most destructive way possible. When it was over, we lay there panting, bodies slick with sweat. Jennifer rolled over and propped herself up on one elbow, looking at me with a triumphant glint. "Michael wants a big family," she said bitterly. "He always talks about having at least 3 kids. Let's give him 1 or 2 that he never even realizes are another man's." I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt sick with guilt, but another part felt grimly satisfied. I had stooped to the same level as Mary and Michael, but in my anger, it felt justified. For the next few days, Jennifer and I kept in touch. We'd whisper to each other on the phone, share any new tidbits we discovered about our cheating spouses, and try to plan out how we might use this knowledge to our advantage. Jennifer was determined to gather hard evidence against Michael. She hired a private investigator and even managed to bug his car with a small recording device. She gave me daily updates, letting me know where Michael had driven, whom he'd met, and how often he was sneaking away with Mary. I wrestled with guilt the whole time, but the sting of betrayal was sharper than any guilt could be. Every time I thought about Mary with Michael, I'd feel this bitterness rise up, reminding me that they were the ones who broke our vows first. Soon enough, Jennifer and I started meeting up regularly. If Michael and Mary decided to spend an afternoon at a motel, we'd rent a suite in a different hotel across town, or even in the same motel, just a few doors down, if we were feeling particularly bold. We'd share tips and evidence, vent about our frustrations, and then tumble into bed, fueled by pain and revenge. It was twisted, sure, but it gave us something to cling to while our spouses carried on their affair in secret. A month or so into this arrangement, Jennifer pulled me aside one afternoon, her eyes wide with emotion. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her hand resting on her stomach. "I went to the doctor to confirm. I'm having twins, 2 girls." My jaw nearly hit the floor. On some level, I knew this might happen, but hearing the words out loud made my head spin. "So, you're telling me there's a good chance Michael's gonna raise my kids?" I asked in disbelief. "That's exactly what I'm saying," she replied, her voice dripping with a strange blend of anger and satisfaction. "He'll never know. I'll let him think they're his. He doesn't deserve the truth after what he's done." My emotions were a wild tangle. Part of me was thrilled at the idea of fathering more children, even if I wouldn't be raising them. Another part felt uneasy, like we'd set in motion something that could never be undone. Meanwhile, my home life grew more complicated. Mary, oddly enough, seemed to sense I was drifting away, and she made a sudden effort to be the perfect wife. She would ask how my day went, offer to rub my shoulders, and plan little outings for the kids. Sometimes, she'd even suggest we spend an evening by ourselves, trying to rekindle the flame. It made me wonder if guilt was eating at her. Despite her affair with Michael, she never admitted a thing, not even once. Jennifer, on the other hand, was battling her own conflicted feelings. There were moments when she'd second-guess the plan, worrying about the impact on her unborn children. But all it took was a reminder, like discovering another hotel receipt or overhearing Michael's phone calls to Mary, and her anger would flare right back up, fueling her determination to carry out this twisted scheme. Over the next several months, Jennifer and I perfected our little system. She'd track Michael's location and share the info with me, and I'd do the same whenever Mary snuck out. We'd time our revenge meetups to coincide with their secret trysts, half the time in a petty competition to see who could guess the next seedy motel they'd pick. As Jennifer's pregnancy progressed, she had to cut down on our physical encounters. The doctor put her on partial bed rest when she started having early contractions. I remember visiting her at her place when Michael was out and seeing all the baby gear piling up in the spare room. Cribs, tiny clothes, pastel blankets. It dawned on me that I was about to be a father all over again, but I wouldn't be the one tucking those little girls into bed at night. Michael would, and he'd do it without suspecting a thing. Sometimes I lay awake at night, listening to Mary's gentle breathing, feeling an odd pang of jealousy that Michael would be raising my children. But then I'd remind myself that both he and Mary had betrayed me in the most painful way possible. If there was any justice to be found, maybe this was it. When the twins arrived, Jennifer sent me a cryptic text. "They are here, both healthy. 5 lbs, 11 Oz each." I read it over and over, trying to wrap my mind around it. I imagined Michael in the hospital, beaming with pride, having no clue I was the biological father. The sheer strangeness of the situation was overwhelming. Jennifer and I kept in contact for a while after the twins were born. She'd give me updates, telling me how they were doing, how Michael was over the moon, and how family members kept commenting on which parent the babies resembled. According to her, no one suspected a thing. In fact, folks talked about how the twins had Michael's chin or Jennifer's bright eyes. The irony of it all hit me hard, but I was in no position to claim fatherhood or blow their secret wide open without revealing my own role in the affair. About a year later, Jennifer got pregnant again. This time it was a boy. Based on our timeline, there was a strong chance he was also mine. The news sent me into another tailspin of emotions. While part of me was strangely proud to be fathering another child, another part realized just how out of hand our situation had become. Eventually, Michael got offered a big promotion in a different state. He and Jennifer packed up and moved away, taking the kids with them. We didn't say any formal goodbyes. One day they were just gone, and that was that. I'd be lying if I said I never thought about those children, my daughters, and possibly my son too. Sometimes I look at Ethan and Ava, then imagine I might have more children out there, sharing half my DNA but living under a different roof, calling Michael Dad. After Michael and Jennifer moved, things between Mary and me were never really the same, although we stayed together. She actually seemed relieved that Michael had left town, but she still never confessed to the affair. Instead, she turned all her energy toward being the ideal spouse and mom. She'd plan fun family road trips, volunteer at the kids' school, and take up my favorite hobbies just to spend more time with me. On the surface, everything looked picture perfect. Inside, though, I was conflicted. On one hand, I admired her efforts to repair our bond. On the other, I couldn't shake the memory of her betrayal. Late at night, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder, could she do it again? Is she just biding her time until the next temptation comes along? The more she tried to be perfect, the more suspicious I became, like she was overcompensating for something. But I kept my suspicions to myself. I never told her I knew about the affair, never flaunted my revenge with Jennifer, and never offered to walk away. My main reason was simple: Ethan and Ava. They were at such tender ages. Ethan was 9, and Ava was 8 at the time, and I couldn't bear to throw their lives into chaos by splitting up. There's a little voice inside me that insists I should have confronted Mary directly, but a louder voice told me to maintain stability for the kids. Right or wrong, that's the choice I made. The months rolled on, turning into years, It's been about 6 years since I first discovered that hotel receipt. In that time, Mary hasn't given me any reason to suspect a new affair. She seems content these days, perhaps more than ever. She spoils the kids, organizes weekends at the lake house with my parents, and occasionally floats the idea of having another child together. That last suggestion always leaves me speechless. How can she talk about building a bigger family with me when she was so willing to risk ours before? At this point, Ethan's well into his teens, and Ava's not far behind. I've thought about whether I'll leave once they're grown and off to college. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I imagine packing a bag, dropping a note on the kitchen counter, and disappearing into a simpler life where I don't have to pretend I've forgiven her. But then, I picture my children's faces and realize how much I'd miss if I walked away too soon. In many ways, I'm living in a fragile truce. I never use the hours of recorded calls, the stolen hotel receipts, or the private investigator's photos as leverage against Mary. Part of me wants to tell her everything. How I knew, how I responded, how Jennifer and I orchestrated our own brand of retribution. But each time I consider it, I talk myself out of it. Sometimes secrets are best left buried, especially when the truth could wreck the only sense of normalcy my kids have ever known. I can't help but wonder about Michael and Jennifer. Did Michael ever realize the kids might not be his? Is Jennifer living a double life as a mother who knows her husband is completely clueless? Do those kids ever look in the mirror and question why they don't resemble the man who tucks them into bed at night? These questions swirl in my mind on occasion, though I'll likely never learn the answers. Every now and then, we visit my parents at their lake house. Nestled among tall pines and calm waters, it's a place that reminds me of simpler times, before I ever knew the pain of betrayal. Ethan and Ava fish off the dock, giggling when a fish nibbles on their line. My dad shows them how to bait a hook, and my mum whips up homemade pies in the tiny kitchen that always smells like cinnamon. Sitting on that weathered porch, I can almost forget the years of deception. I'll lean back in a rocking chair, let the sun warm my face, and imagine a life where Mary and I never faced that heartache. Sometimes she'll come out with a cold drink for me, and for a brief moment we'll lock eyes. I see regret in hers, or maybe it's just my imagination. She'll reach for my hand, and I'll let her take it, not wanting to spoil the peace. In that tranquil setting, I almost believe we've found our way back. 6 years is a long time to live with a secret this big, and I have no idea what the next 6 will hold. Maybe Mary and I will stay together forever, forging a path that leaves the past behind us. Or maybe I'll find the courage to cut ties and seek a life that feels more honest. Either way, I know I can't keep coasting on autopilot forever. Eventually, the truth has a way of surfacing, one way or another. For now, though, I'll keep focusing on Ethan and Ava, making sure they have the best childhood I can provide. If Mary's truly changed and won't stray again, maybe we'll manage to rebuild. And if she breaks my trust once more, I know I'll walk away without looking back. If you've stuck around this long to hear my tale, I appreciate your time. Consider it a cautionary story about betrayal, revenge, and the consequences that come with both. Love can be fragile, and trust can be shattered in the blink of an eye. If you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, tread carefully. Revenge might feel good in the moment, but it often leaves a mess in its wake, one you'll be cleaning up for years. They say the next chapter of my life could be even wilder than this one. Believe me, I've got plenty more stories rattling around in my head, tales of old friends, new enemies, and a few bombshells that might just make your jaw drop. If you're game to hear more, stick around. But if you'd rather not dive any deeper into this rabbit hole of drama, I sure don't blame you. Either way, thanks for keeping me company through all of this. If you're watching or listening on some platform, feel free to leave a comment, share your thoughts, or subscribe for the next installment of My Crazy Life. And for those of you who prefer calmer waters, I completely understand if you hop off here. Some journeys just aren't for the faint of heart. But no matter where you go next, remember to guard your heart, cherish real friendships, and keep an eye out for red flags. Trust me, you never know when life will toss you a curveball you never saw coming. My story is proof of that, and I'm still figuring out how to handle the final inning. Thank you for listening to the story until the end.